That's my cue, right? Okay. Thank you all for coming to the Research Symposium today. And I'll just give you a sort of overview of the timing. Normally, you need to stop at about 20 after, but there's no one in the room for the next period. So we're going to blend into about ending around 1:30. So if you need to leave before that, Jochen won't be offended, but we are going to take the full hour in the room since we have it. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Jochen Scholl, a professor in the Information School. He has a PhD from SUNY Albany and an MBA from the Graduate School of Business Administration in Zurich, Switzerland. And he was in, before he came to academia, he held various positions in industry, both technical and managerial, including with Apple and Data General. His research areas are disaster information management, smart governance and government, and also information artifact evaluation. Now, Jochen's been the long-standing chair of the digital government track at Hicks, and so that's been a great accomplishment over a long period of time. But he's also past chair of the International Federation of Information Processing Working Group on Information Systems in Public Administration. He has several new publications. I'll just mention a couple, I think, of interest. One in the Government Information Quarterly, which is on regulation as both enabler of technology use and global competitive weapon. And then also he had a best paper nominated for the 2018 ISCRAM conference on communications and technology challenges to situational awareness. But probably the greatest recognition over this last year has been Jochen was named one of the world's top 100 most influential people in digital government in 2018. So it's a great pleasure to have him here today to speak to us about disaster response in the Pacific Northwest. So I'll turn it over to you, Jochen.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, I have too many slides, I know. So I'm so happy that we don't have to stick to the exact time. And I want to jump in. I see that we are a really diverse group here of people from practice, from communities, students, academicians. So it's an interesting audience with diverse interests. And I just want to tell you what I'm trying to do here in the amount of time that I have. I want to first talk and address the context, then also talk about my specific research interest. We have conducted two studies, fairly extensive studies, one on the SR3 530 landslide in 2014, the other on the large exercise, the Cascadia Rising exercise in 2016. I was a planner for that, in part for the situational assessment portion, also evaluator for that, and also a player at the City of Seattle Emergency Operating Center in the damage unit, which was a very interesting experience. I will skip the whole lit review. It is too much. It will take too much time. I will refer to a few things while I go along. I'll present you all the research questions, but they are all too many, so I have 3 clusters, and I will discuss the findings and the discussion along those clusters. I will also skip the methodology section that will interest the academicians amongst us. At ResearchGate, except for the last one, which is just in print because it was accepted for the eGov conference later this year. I will then present findings, discussions, and have some conclusions, and then some questions. So let's start. I want to establish the context here. Who has grown up here? Okay, so I would say 20%. Okay. Who has lived here for more than 10 years? Okay, that's good. Who recently arrived? Okay, a few. Okay. So what's so special about this particular area where we live? It's beautiful, right? What else? What do you know? Those who are born here. Very good communities. By the way, I was at the community hub in Morgan Park just on Saturday that you ran, and we may at the end talk about that and what it means. What else? Okay. Okay, what does it mean? Yes, you can see the beast. Okay. Yeah, well, when those of you who came just recently, did you know what you were putting yourself up to? Okay, so what is it? I mean, the people from here, I remember being born in West Seattle, you most probably knew it very early on, right? So the point is, you live in one of the most dangerous places in the country. Yeah, the welcome to some place. I mean, we know California. Who's from California? Oh, a little bit. Okay, a little bit Californian. People growing up in California know, well, they have to deal with earthquakes, with wildfires, you know, and they get drills very early on. We were sort of oblivious of that, or we just didn't know. Actually, geology just gave us the bad news only some 30 years ago. And it was a glimpse only. Nobody really listened to that much. It became clearer and clearer as we went along. And by the end of the 1990s, it became clear that this here is a really, really hot spot. Now, with some regularity, we have earthquakes here. We have other things I will show you in a moment. So that's the context. And this is from the wonderful, and I pass this around here, and take a look at this wonderful document from the City of Seattle Emergency Center. It's called the SHIVA, the Seattle Hazard Identification and Vulnerability Analysis. It's a big thing. And I'm very proud of these colleagues who produce that and regularly update this. What it shows you is an assessment that is just Seattle. It's not King County. It's not Washington State. This is Seattle. And what they did is here, they evaluated the most likely scenarios and ranked them then, the weight. And because you cannot read this here, I just want to give you the top 5 here. It is earthquakes, it is snow and ice storms, and it is windstorms. Who remembers one? Hanukkah Eve? Oh, my kids like that. Candlelight for 3 days, no warm water, because half of Seattle was out of power by a windstorm. Some others call that the equivalent to a hurricane. I can actually have that strength. There are power outages, and there are cyber attacks, disruptions, and landslides, also referred to as mudslides. So that is a particular story I tell you when we talk about the SR 530, or also known as OSO. Now, what is so particular about the Seattle, and now I can really say also King County and Washington State thing. This is from the same source here, the SHIVA document. Well, these natural hazards come in clusters, so to speak. The first thing happens, and then the next happens. Let's take earthquakes. Earthquakes are accompanied with regularity by landslides. There can also be volcanic incidents as a result. The big one, for sure, also the Seattle Fault earthquake, will be accompanied by a tsunami or sage. Sage is a similar thing. It's like if you whip water in a bathtub and it goes back and forth, that's sage. Cyber attacks can be fires, hazmat incidents, infrastructure failures, power outages. Excessive heat is not in it, but flooding is, and so is water shortages or water outages, we should rather say. Similar thing, scenarios for landslides. Now, I developed a growing interest back in 2008 when I worked on a grant from the National Science Foundation, when the National Science Foundation still gave grants for digital government research, which it no longer does. Actually, it stopped under the previous administration because they thought that all topics and problems in digital government were solved. So we had to do other things, not funded by NSF. But I had a big grant, and we looked into how the Seattle Public Utilities converted their field operations into mobile dispatching, and they had their mobile systems with them. And what I found there was a system that I found really striking. The so-called, those people from Seattle may have heard of FOMS, the Field Operation Management System. What it does, it's a geocoded system that records everything that is in the ground. But it's also only what SBU and maybe City Light owns, not necessarily what the gas providers or some other firms like Comcast have in the ground. Yeah, so if you want to do something in Seattle, you have to call all these stakeholders, and FOMS is for Seattle Public Utility and City Light, the one thing that they determine what they can do and when they can dig. Now, along with FOMS, I saw that SPU had an emergency unit, and they did drills. And that was actually, for the first time, I got aware of, oh, there's something going on here. And they opened my eyes, and then we began studying this. Out from that grant, we began studying emergency responses here. We did a little bit research and found that there is nobody who talks about disasters and disaster information management from an information management perspective. There was basically absolutely no literature. So we began to understand and to discuss amongst ourselves, what does it need to research a disaster from that particular information perspective? And as we know, or those who know are in disaster management here, that there is something called situational awareness. And situational awareness is what is most scarce in the situation when something happens. Now, we were just in this process when something else happened. It was one Thursday evening, late evening. I was preparing for class the next day. I had in the background CNN running. And all of a sudden, breaking news. There's an earthquake in Japan, which happened for them the next day. It was March 10th. And I was still sitting there, 11:30, and I saw frightening things. For example, a van trying desperately to escape the tsunami that came after it. And you could see how the wave, the tsunami, finally consumed the van. That was my aha moment. And I said, I have to delve into this here a little more deeply, because by that time, I already understood there's something similar going on in this area here. Okay, so around that time, I held here, it was not in this building, it was in Mary Gates, a research talk on how important it is that we have disaster information management. And I said things like, I have to read it to you. I strongly believe that we, the iSchool, need to engage in this subfield of disaster sciences more deeply and more widely. We have a chance to make a real difference in mitigating the impact of catastrophes, an opportunity to save lives, and a need and opportunity to develop an unattended academic subfield in the basket of disaster sciences. So I held that on December 2nd, 2013, and then a little later this year happened. Okay, so we were just ready with getting our thoughts together about, what is this? And then the hillside of 180 meters So something like 500 feet up, collapsed, completely collapsed, 8 million square meters, ran down. In 1 minute, all this here came across. There was a little village here in Steelhead Drive, 50 structures, 43 people killed in an incident, just in 1 moment. And so just so you know where that is, also is when you go past Everett, a little further up, there's SR 530 is here, and he is also in this beautiful valley of the North Fork of the Stillaguamish. This is not unsimilar how it still looks today. It still looks like a moon landscape. And so back then, the state road was closed and covered by debris for a mile almost. It took half a year to the day to reopen it and rebuild it. 119 government agencies were involved, about 1,100 individuals, 350, a third from the National Guard. And incident commands, the US has a framework, NIMS, ICS, and NRF, standing for National Incident Management System, Incident Command System, and the National Response Framework, which is the doctrine and a set of best practices. And it also defines the type of response. The higher the type, so it's type 1, then it's a national thing. Type 2 is state level capabilities and size of a team. Type 3 is regional. And then you have local responders, typically the fire guard for if a house is burning down. So all victims were recovered, and the estimated cost of the whole thing, life, damage, and response, in excess of $1 billion. Okay, so at the same time where that happened, already some preliminary planning, including some simulation runs, were done, and that was by the state and FEMA Region 10. And directly after what happened in East Japan, the Tohoku earthquake, it became clear that we here can no longer wait and just see what happens next. So a large-scale exercise was planned, which finally was conducted. And I was as I said, in the planning and also in the analysis, conducted between June 7th and 10th, 3 years ago, involved 23,000 people. Just think of how many people were engaged in this exercise. One of the largest exercises ever conducted in the US, the largest multi-state exercise in the Pacific Northwest. Objective was to really see how can one respond to something of the magnitude 9, similar to what we have seen in Japan, which was exactly the same thing here. 2 plates, tectonic plates, run against each other. One begins to, like a zipper, open up, and then you have 5 to 6 minutes of really violent shaking while that goes along. And so that was the exercise and the planning of that. Now, I borrowed this slide from Lieutenant Colonel Clayton Brown, who meanwhile has retired from the National Guard, but he was on the National Guard side, the one who gave us even more chills by presenting this here. He said, look, there is a ring of fire. We know that. Everybody who was born here, there's the ring of fire. And we have that around the Pacific Ocean, and we have all these tectonic plates here, the subduction zones that meet. And every star here marks a major earthquake in the last 50 years. Now, if you look, there's only one plate where there is no star, and that is ours. Okay. Now, the ring of fire, as we say here, accounts for 90% of all earthquakes and 81% of the largest. And Here we have quite some activities. Abduction zones are shown, as I said. And so now the big question becomes, well, why is that we haven't had this star here? And when was the last earthquake of that size, of that magnitude? Does anybody know, except for the practitioners here who all know? Everybody of you knows that. We know even the exact time of the day, thanks to our Japanese record keepers. They recorded the tsunami when it came to their shores, and then it's just a little math equation to count back when it happened here. So it was on January 26th, 1700 at 21:30 hours. So 9:30 p.m. We know that, and we found ample evidence of what happened also in the geology, now that we knew it was there. And we also saw how devastating it was back then. So a scenario was built. There was the so-called high-track simulation, and our colleagues from the Resilience Institute of Western Washington University prepared this wonderful document. It has scenarios for everything that happens in this M9, and just pass it around, take a brief look. So, and you can download all these documents from the web. So what we will see if this big thing happens is everything that you see in darker red colors and orange colors here will be heavily impacted. There will be a 30 to 40 foot high tsunami in about 20 to 30 minutes after the rupture. As I told you, it is like a zipper. So here in this here, the epicenter or the starting point was set here. That was just the simulation. And then it would zip up for the 700 or 800 miles that it has. And so there will be several aftershocks and of significant magnitude. What has not come down in the first shock will certainly come or be damaged in the shocks after. Impacted areas west of the Cascadian mountain range would be inaccessible by ground transport. Just swallow that. Everything west here, oops, will be inaccessible because although many bridges, like I guess there was 1,100 bridges that go down, overpasses, underpasses, and that would mean relief would first predominantly come by air. But SeaTac will be damaged too. Boeing Field will be damaged too. Payne Field will be damaged. All that will be damaged. What that means is the capacity goes down. We think there will only be one runway open at SeaTac. So that will create some unique problem to address. Now, I want to spend 2 more minutes on this here before I move into the research. So 1,100 bridges, many fires, many landslides. I talked to Jason Bierman, who is the director of the EMD in Snohomish County. He said, we think that we will deal with 60 islands where people are trapped. They cannot get out, they cannot get in. The bridges are down, many of the roads will be burst, so in a way you cannot drive. So the only thing is you can walk. So at the same time, we now know that the water will stop running the same day. Can you see what's going to happen there? It's a humanitarian crisis of proportions. That is the task responders have to face here, okay? And that is, by the way, and I promised my wife, who sits in the back, not to pass this around here. This is a family's emergency pack. You should have one at home and you should have one in your office, not this big one, this for the family, there are smaller ones. Everything is in there to survive, and later in the discussion, I would like you to also address what you, as a community representative, propose to people who came on Saturday, how much of water, food, and fuel, and what have you they should have. Okay, so Before I go into some of the results and the research questions, before I do that, I want to show you a little categorizations of disasters here. Henry Fisher in 2003 had a nice article where he said, okay, we can basically categorize disasters this way. The Oso mudslide would, or landslide would be something between DC 4 and 5. And what he says is major scale scope duration on a township level, or major scale duration partial scope in a medium-sized city. So examples would be airliner crash, forest fire, also our mudslide. And what we are talking about in terms of M9, M9 plus, is something between 9 and 10 years. Examples include the Japan earthquake that I mentioned before. Now, the research interests on my part, from an information perspective, focused on three things, or three areas. First of all, I knew from having contact with the practitioner responders that there is this problem of situational awareness. And if there is one topic that is at the heart of all information studies, you know, how to get the information to those people who need it to respond, then many of the responders, or all today, use information technology, and specific information technology. And so it needed to be clarified how the ICTs, the information technologies, help or how they hinder. And then not only attributable to 1 and 2, but also what other managerial challenges are there that include information aspects. So the OSO response study and this study here use the same theoretical lens that we had developed before, the same methodology, and largely the same instrument. And so far, we have quite a number of publications here. So everything that you see here from here on is OSO and Cascadia Rising. This one was just accepted a few weeks ago. Now, I don't want to go through all the research questions here. That is, of all the papers, the research questions, I showed you the big three clusters. But as you can see here, we started with OSO, focused on situational awareness and the managerial challenges, and then became a little more specific when it came to Cascadia Rising. Just so you know what the data collection involved and included, we interviewed a total of almost 50 individuals, some in group interviews, 31 for OSO, 17 for Cascadia, from all levels of responders. It was a total of 59 hours, 45 interviews for OSO, 14 and a quarter for Cascadia. We had a large number of after-action reports that we systematically analyzed, 32, 9 for OSO, 23 for Cascadia. We looked at incident log files, numerous other planning documents, press releases, and other documents, and also had some tool and ICT demonstrations from tools that were used in the responses. Now let's go to the findings. I start with OSO. So there's an interesting myth about when you talk to people when they had full situational awareness. Now, some people said, we had full situational awareness on Sunday. So Saturday, it happened in the morning. Sunday, they had full situational awareness. By the way, if anything here sounds like I'm critical of any of these responders, I'm not. I believe that we have some outstanding people out there. They are so dedicated, so committed, so highly qualified. What this year is not about blaming anybody for anything. So these people are not to blame, but it's a perceptual thing. And so some people told me, yeah, we knew everything on Sunday. Then the question became, why do you deploy the type 2 team only on day 5? Yeah. So the type 2 team are the bigger guns. Yeah, first the locals respond, then the locals say, we are completely overwhelmed, which they were on day one. Then the next day, the county invoked the type 3, the regional team. It's much larger in size than Willie Harper's little fire department and fire station 27 that responded. So they finally, on day 4, came to the conclusion that they have to call the bigger guns. And that tells you when they had real situational awareness. And even then, it took longer to really understand what it was. Now, let's talk about what that means. The disaster, the first thing that you do is you perceive something. Something is happening. Okay, Mika Ensley, the chief scientist of the Air Force, analyzed pilots, and she said, you know, you see something coming, you register, it's there, but that is far cry from understanding what it is. Okay, so now comes you begin to understand, and you understand a little more. Understanding is not boom, eureka, it develops in a little bit. So when that process is over, you finally have something that is called projection. Oh, you know the consequences, you understand what you can do. So only if you are in this projection phase, so that you know the consequences and your options, your choices, then you have really full situational awareness. And I would claim that was around here. Yeah, and so when we talk about situational awareness, we have to keep that in mind. There were disconnect between air crews and ground responders. So about 30 minutes after it had happened, we had 3 helicopters in the area. They saw everything. What they did is what is right to do. They did search and rescue. They saw this little boy running around. You may have seen the footage, and picked him up. And they looked for other people that they could rescue. And they found at least another dog, not by helicopter, it was on the ground. And while they were doing that and engaged, they didn't talk to the ground people. I talked to Willie Harper, and he said, that's the OSO fire chief. And he said, we stood there before this wall of debris, and we didn't even know where it had come from. We didn't see where the hill had collapsed. We thought at first it had come from the other side. They had no connection to the other side, the Darrington side of it. So there was a disconnect between air crews and ground crews, which is not conducive to situational awareness. And then, of course, the physical obstacles and a lack of involvement of the county EOC, and that's a story by itself that we don't want to touch on because that problem has been resolved. What also came through is that there was no collection of what the disaster responders call essential elements of information. Basically, it is lists that you can prepare before you go and say location or asset, who owns it, who knows about that, in what state it is, who has this information and who needs to know. So if something happens, you have that list, you say, oh, here this thing is down or is no longer usable. Who owns it? Who has the information about this? Who needs to know? And you can easily distribute that. That was completely missing, so they had to do everything from scratch. Other findings, role of information communication technology. There was such a heterogeneity of systems, they were completely incompatible. People brought their own devices, their own laptops. When they left the shift in the evening, they took their laptop with them. With them went all the information. The Arlington Incident Management Post finally had because there's sensitive information also, I mean, remember there are many dead people there, and they collected all that information. So what they did is, from the incident command, there was an encrypted hard disk that was uploaded all the information. When night came, nobody could work on the debris field. So they would have everything on this encrypted hard drive and bring it over to Everett. Next morning, it would come back. Yeah, that was the means of communication during also here for the incident command. There were numerous media breaks. And who has ever operated on radio frequencies here? And you know what that means here, incompatibility. So we don't want to even invoke the military, who has their completely different frequencies and channels. It even responders from neighboring jurisdictions couldn't talk to each other, and several departments could not. So there was a great lack of integrated and secure interoperability, both vertical and horizontal, in this particular response. What that does to situational awareness, pretty clear. There's not much, or it takes longer. So let's turn to Cascadia Rising. So this is now 2 years later. And interestingly, many of those people that we interviewed in Oslo, who, by the way, some of these interviews were really touching, because these people had worked very long shifts, and they had come across really cruel and grueling things, observations. And I don't want to go into the details that they shared, but I understand that some of these people have what you know from veterans, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and they needed some treatment after they came back from the response. Now here, this is only 2 years later with many of those people that we interviewed, but we also saw immediately in this the lack of standardized information flows and protocols. There was no standardized push mechanism, for example, for sharing information. There are no standardized situation reports, so every jurisdiction does pretty much what they want, and then you have to pull it together. It is harder for the counties coming from the municipalities if that is not standardized, and so on and so forth. Information sources, needs and information overload, big time, which is typical for a disaster response. There's a problem of identifying adequate lists and paths of distribution. Again, we have the same EEI thing here. Lack of checklists, which balance between detailed information and aggregation. And there were a lot of data overflow problems, information inconsistency, information was old, impacts were also, and that was one of the biggest information problems, that shifts, and that we saw that at OSO already. So shift ended, people packed up their stuff, we're gone, without briefing of the next shift. You know what that means? You start from scratch. Yeah? That slows down the response so much. And that we observed again here in Cascadia. The other thing is who works with Web EOC from the practitioners here? Okay, I know there are as many views on Web EOC that you can have, and I don't want to go into this. And I can say from own experience and from talking to the responsible at the city of Seattle, they have one of the best implementations. But even this best implementation that I have seen anywhere, it is a system that has some issues. One of the issues is not only that it's JavaScript based and cloud based, which is actually good, but the user interface, even the new graphical user interface, still has something really cumbersome underneath. It is just the surface. So there are severe functional rigidities. It is not self-explicatory, not intuitive at all. It is not integrated well enough with ArcGIS, which is the leading software used in response. It has no sophisticated tracking mechanisms. I've used it myself. It was the older version in 2016. It was sort of challenging. And there are multiple boards like status updates, significant events, task manager, and you have to know it. Now you are a responder, and the Seattle Emergency Operations Center has 16 FTEs, 17 now? 14, oh, you went down, okay. So these are the coordinators, okay? Now everybody from all the agencies comes in, and these guys coordinate them. They are not doing the job the other people are doing, they are the coordinators. So now the coordinators come in, from fire, from transportation, from what have you, all the city departments, and now they use Web EOC. And when did they use WebOSC the last time? Maybe 6 months ago, maybe 12 months ago. Now you have a cumbersome system, nice graphical user interface, but now you are up in the stress of the situation of responding, and you scratch your head. You have to double log in. First you log into the system, then you log into active duty, and only then you are on. I see some people nodding here, and so it is nothing where you say, oh, easy to use in a situation where you cannot focus on technology. You have to focus on everything else. So I concluded here, we saw that this is not really also the interoperability issues, and I will come to that in a moment. For example, the state WebEOC crashed because it was not scalable. 5 counties came on, it still worked very slowly. 6 counties, even slower. 10 counties, very slow. 15 counties, it crashed. Yeah, now we have 35 counties impacted here. So this is not scalable. And it's a private commercial off-the-shelf system. And we need to think about what we can do. It's used nationwide. FEMA endorses it, but we have a huge problem here. There's a lack of readiness of this system for large incidents, and there are several workarounds, but they are what I say, workarounds. Radio technologies. Well, I don't want to repeat what I have said for OSO. It was not resolved, even though the state has made some really great improvements here in terms of frequencies, assignments, and so on. But I want to talk for a second on the limitation of alternate auxiliary communication. Fortunately, finally, ham radio was integrated, amateur radio. It's a wonderful resource. But we had a phase where it was a little bit overhyped. Like, you can replace, if everything else goes down, then you still have ham radio. And since ham radio is not necessarily only here in the area, but elsewhere, well, ladies and gentlemen, also ham radio needs power, right? And if power is not there, you neither have ham radio. Now, the nice thing is, if you have the ham radio operators also trained in all these FEMA courses, and they know the protocol, they know the language, they understand, it may be a great help. However, it will never have the bandwidth to help significantly with a large response like this one. So I talked about the physical obstacles before, the problem of the islands here, and you should all really, for yourself, think about what you do. You need something like that. You will be trapped in the best case. If you're not victimized, you will sit on some of these islands. There are people who get hungry. The Seattle EOC does these surveys frequently. How many days of food and water do you have? How much fuel? I don't know. I know the 2015 numbers, but it was less than 3 days, nobody will come to help you. You will be for yourself on your own for at least 3 weeks. And in some cases, they may not even come after 3 weeks. So you have to have something like this. You have to have water and all that. There will be blockages. We also observed a lot of interjurisdictional coordination challenges. As in also, the unified command structure, according to NIMS, was slowly formed, but it was formed. There is a lack of standards, unfortunately, also in NIMS. And NIMS is this doctrine that we have in the United States, which is unifying and basically wonderful, but it leaves too many things open to adaptation. Now, I'm coming to the end of the final findings here. There are some other managerial challenges, the lack of standardized operations and processes and functions despite NIMS, and there are no standards basically for the processes and procedures. I want to spend a little time on staffing. Now, there's a certain challenge in the big one, and that is how many personnel do you think can report to duty? 30%. Yeah. So what does that mean? What does that mean? It's not only it's the whole here's the catch. The higher price Seattle is, the fewer Seattle employees can afford to live here. That means you have even fewer people who can do the job, you know? So those are some of those things that we are looking at here. So there were quite a number of people not reporting to duty, and that is not only a number problem, it's also an essential expertise problem. You will not have the people that you need to have to fly the helicopter or whatever. And so we saw a little bit also over-reliance on volunteers in that department. Resource management, we observed a real improvement between OSO and Cascadia, at least between the state level and FEMA. When it comes lower, it was the same problem and processed again, that there were double entries. Resource management really did not work well. The planners on state, FEMA, and military level said, okay, here is one thing that we have to consider now, and that is, because everybody will be overwhelmed, we switch from a pull concept to a push concept. That means normally the West Coast, everybody is a home rule state. You know, you cannot come from the feds and say, by the way, do it this way. No, sheriff says, you are out of your area of competence here. Please go away. You know, they won't take any orders. The county is not from the state, the municipality is not from the counties, let alone the feds. So home rule, wonderful. For everything that is small, great. Now we have this here. Yeah, well, you don't even know what the capabilities are. The military has some astounding capabilities that you need in situations like that, but you don't even know what to request, you know? So here you are, and the military says, okay, we know what you need in a situation like that, so we push it down even though you don't request it. Now comes the problem. Here is in the staging area, all these push stuff. Now, who takes over responsibility? Yeah. And by the way, a disaster is not only where you at the end have a big bill, you know, 1.5 trillion or billion or whatever it is. No, it is an economic decision whether you want to have this resource or not, because you have to pay for that as the local municipality unless you have a disaster declaration. And most of 87.5% is taken over by others. Okay, so let me discuss here. And I will go through this a little more quickly so we have some more time for a question or a comment. There are some persisting known problems. The study, CR16 study, reconfirmed exactly the unabated persistence of these key issues that I have presented here. And there's a need for standardizing, which is not yet addressed. And the standardizing is not only the org charts, it is the processes. And we also stumble a little bit about verification. People in disaster response, for very good reasons, hold information close to their chest when it's not completely vetted. So they don't pass it on until they are 100% sure this is the information. So that means sometimes there is some part of information where they're not completely sure, they hold it, they don't pass it. So no information, no ready information sharing culture unless it's vetted. Vetting may not be possible because you can't. So what do we do with this situation? Walking with information that is sort of checked, keeping it completely out of the loop, or attaching a label to that. We could not vet it all. Take it with a grain of salt. It is taken, we have partially vetted it, but you are on your own. And so some sort of a label we could put to that. Also, the dissemination methods are not standardized yet. SIT reports, SIT rep, situational reports, look, everybody does his own or her own thing. The importance of essential elements of information, I cannot emphasize enough how much of a difference that makes. We discussed that on Saturday at the hub. And I said, you know, it is such a almost dire planning exercise, but having that or having it not is most probably the big difference that can be made. We should, as I said, rethink the information sharing paradigm here. We should also consider how we better can, if the technology is there, have visualization of things that are known. And then my major point here is go for the low-hanging fruits. Make it necessary, and nobody can leave a shift without having passed over and briefed the next shift. That is the easiest thing, a lowest hanging fruit that you can have. Also, in the light of Cascadia, you need to contingency plan for extended paper-based operation. Here comes the trick. The power will be out for between a year and a half. Just swallow that. A year to a year and a half. It will come back in pockets here and there. So if you have it coming back in pockets, of course you can use your computers. There will be no networking, but it's better to have something here as long as you can have it, and then transfer it somehow. But it's paper-based. It will be paper and messenger-based. So it will be slow. And then it comes back gradually, and you have to transfer everything that you have on paper elsewhere. And what I suggest, we also need to discuss how we can have people elsewhere in a safe area, outside the disaster zone, that take over the paper records and overnight put that into systems so we can spread the information and feed back. It is also possible to have helicopters flying in laptops that are recharged, even if you are out of power. So you can work for a few hours. And so we have to think about some mechanisms that are smart. Here is Turov's list of how you evaluate a emergency system ready for prime time of emergency. It said extreme ease of learning, not so with everything I've seen. Usability by trained responders, yeah, met in part. Conciseness, not so. Customizability to respond to specific needs. Yes, in Web EOC you can do that, but you can do even too much, you know, so nobody else can really understand what you're doing. That makes the Web EOC versions incompatible with each other. Support for all EOC IMT functions, mainly lacking. Major point is GIS, independence from particular physical location. As long as you have power, wonderful, it's cloud-based. However, it is very limited in terms of scalability. Support for structured communication processes can be met by a number of system studies, but there is still this lack of standardization. And IT actually could be a driving force for standardizing NIMS and ICS more. Okay, I'm coming to the end of this. So manifold obstacles. My major thing that I want to highlight here is the lack of planning integration. If neighboring jurisdictions are on different planning cycles and don't synchronize their plans, then we have a problem. The problem, I mean, it is actually, let me cite, and we had that in the class, remember, Dwight D. Eisenhower, what he said on planning? Plans are worthless, but planning is indispensable. Sounds like a conundrum. It's not. It is in the planning process. You come across all the issues, and particularly if you synchronize your planning with your neighbors and have synchronized planning, you visit all the issues and you can address them. So, oh, I have one more. Actually, let's see. How do we do? So I emphasize need for plan and practice paper-based operation. I hope that Cascadia 2020 does all that. Planning also for reduced staff levels, and also the pull-push thing has to be re-evaluated and actually be exercised. Now, in conclusion, response to a catastrophe is markedly different from any regular emergency. It's a new world. It's something that has not been seen before. Cascadia Rising should incorporate all these lessons learned, and many of these, what we found in our research, I have also seen in the FEMA report, in the state report, in the National Guard report. Now, before I close here, I want to talk about who has participated in this research, and that is what I'm so proud of. This is the iSchool, and at the iSchool, we have wonderful students. And here in this research, which was an educational and a practical experience for many of these students, either as independent study or as volunteer researchers, they went all through a CT training, so they could do interviewing, and they were trained in doing that. They were trained in qualitative methods. I also required from most of them, particularly those involved in Cascadia Rising, that they had the elementary FEMA courses, IS 100-200, ICS 213, ICS 700, and ICS 800. So we have some trained people here now. And it's an amazing number of people. And as you can see, some people here actually stayed on after they had graduated and continued. So an enormous educational and practical exercise. I want to close with a quote from Eric Holdeman. It will not happen during my lifetime. It happens during my lifetime, but I will not be impacted. It happens, I will be affected, but I will be fine. One cannot do anything about it anyway. Well, I disagree on every single point. Thank you, Eric. These are the 4 modes of denial, and I want to open it up for some comments. And thank you.
So we only have a couple of minutes, so I'll take a couple quick questions.
And if you want to ask questions or comments, please make sure that you use the mic. There are a few that are spread across the room.
Yes, Julie. Good to see you again.
Okay, is it working? Yes. I'm just wondering, is there any disaster planning being done on the level of those individual islands to make sure that, I don't know, communication or infrastructure or ham operators are each distributed in each island or anything like that?
First of all, we don't know exactly what the island will be. Yeah, but I had a conversation with Jason Bierman, the EMD director of Snohomish County. He said, I'm pretty sure I know where they are, and they are doing exactly that. Yeah, I don't know about King County at the moment. It will be much more difficult to do that for King County here. City?
Yeah,
Mike, please.
There's a multi-pronged approach about identifying and addressing sort of this geologic isolation that we may face in a large-scale earthquake, especially Seattle Fault Zone earthquake, part of which I think Cindy actually is a part of that strategy, the community hubs, if you're not familiar with that particular program or strategy. But it's not just the community-based efforts, but in our own planning on how we actually do things like communications and logistics, specifically getting goods and people and services into those geographically isolated areas, are a large part of our planning process. I can't say that we have all the answers, but it is certainly an effort.
Okay, yes, please. Pucci, is that working?
So I have a question. It's in my experience that you'll really never have enough people trained in enough areas. And so there's kind of 2 theories of thought. You either increase the training or you increase the standardization, not standardization, but find out what people do during their normal life and make some kind of a segue into the training. So build on what they normally do. And on that, the context within the city of Seattle, they have hubs now, they have, but I think here's where planning can really, just land use planning can really help some of the situations. Again, with the whole theme being do what you normally do, build on what you normally do, and then fit the disaster response to what you normally do. And within the, urban neighborhoods concepts, you have really the hubs. You have, these are not geographic, these are also man-made. So there are 6 or 7 areas in the city of Seattle that will become isolated. You can kind of know that, and you can build your smart growth on that concept. And so I think emergency managers have to work with land use planners to achieve that. But also I think that we're never gonna have enough people trained. So if we found out deficiencies during a response, then we should look at what normal activities occur and try to fit those deficiencies to normal activities versus just training more and more people. So that's.
I agree. As I said before, I also believe that from the responder side that we can do more, and I'm particularly looking at the feds in terms of standardizing NIMS, ICS even more by technology support that would be federally supported. And that helps introduce processes and structures that we currently are lacking, where we have so many incompatibilities.
Right.
But I agree with you. The local planning is of the essence. Yeah.
And one quick note: when in terms of the push, having spent most of my life working for FEMA, in terms of the push, many times what the push is not really what you want. I mean, you can't take a tank and put a plow on it. It's just not geared toward it. And if you take a helicopter from the reserve versus a normal helicopter, you're spending 3 times the amount.
Yeah.
And with people that know half what you know in terms of that specific talent. So.
Yeah, the other thing is when you talk about the military, I mean, the military is the most resourceful responder many times, but that's not their mission. We should also keep that in mind. They don't work under the premises of NIMS ICS. It's a completely different world. And it amazed me to see how much, for example, the National Guard has engaged and adjusted and taken on this particular problem here. And by the way, I just at the end here want to say thank you to all these responders. I admire these people tremendously. They put so many hours and they have so much commitment. And they work not necessarily under the best conditions. For example, I cannot tell any names here for all the reasons, but I talked to the urban search and rescue commander, the task incident manager of the team on the Western debris field, and he said, he showed me his telephone. He said, "This is my mobile telephone, 2003. I couldn't use that. Against code and against order, I used my own smartphone, and we geolocated things that we couldn't dig up that day because we needed to get back to exactly the same location. So we are behind that, also, and there's a big need. I see big needs for training, big needs for process and plan integration, and then for more modern equipment that needs to come in. We think about this scalability thing in terms of from paper to electronic, back to paper and electronic. That is a very complex thing. And I hope we will be able to address that in 2022.
Okay, we're going to have to close up, but maybe you can all stay around for a question or two if you want to linger. Thank you again.
Sure, thank you. Thanks. Have you ever seen how heavy this is? I have one. You have one, okay.